Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolette Springer, and I am running for Orange County Commission.
And my name's Gabe. I work with Nicolette. I'm her field director.
So Gabe and I, we normally have this Facebook Live every third Friday of the month, and you guys can catch that, the schedule for that on our website, which is nicolettespringer.com, or here on Facebook, we have that as an event. Normally we have very funny, witty banner. Typically, that's our theme. Is we just kind of chit chat and tell you a little bit about me as a candidate, some of the things that are going on in the county, some of the things that we've been doing as the campaign. So we talk about our canvassing. Tomorrow we'll be canvassing. We're talking about a few of those things, and all of those events you can find on our website, and you can find them all on Facebook. But today we thought we would take a little bit of a more somber tone, and we're going to talk about the gun violence that happened in South Florida this week, and we're going to talk about gun safety and some of the things that we can do as leaders and as community leaders, and from a county perspective and a state perspective and a federal perspective of what we should be doing, not only as people like myself who are running for office and what your expectations of someone in an elected position should be, and what your expectations for what a candidate should be, but also what you can do as a citizen and how we can all come together as a community to address what, the horrible events that occurred 2 days ago.
That's right.
So this will be a little bit different, and I think we're trying hard to maintain our emotions and to not be too angry and bitter and resentful. I take pride in a skill that I have of being a really good problem solver. And it's why I was so good at my last job when I did the program evaluation for the state and the county. And I tend to look at problems in a different way than most people. I tend to bottle up a little bit of my emotions and really try to find a solution to make things better. And so I'm hoping that we can just have a conversation today about what we're all feeling and what we can potentially do as the average citizen, and what I can do as a candidate, and what your elected officials should be doing. And it's going to be not easy. So we're going to try to keep it as light as we can, but it's not a light subject. And we're going to try to be open about opinions and hear other people's voices. So we encourage you all to comment in and to do your best to keep it cordial. We're not here to attack anyone. We don't want to have any of that kind of banter in the feed. So if you guys have some constructive criticism, if you have pointed arguments that you'd like to make that you feel are valid, then please put them out there and we will make comments on them. Katie's in the background, and she will do her best to kind of get those questions to us. And she's also going to be dropping in links as we go along for some resources and some of the things that we'll be talking about. So I'm going to kind of let Gabe give us a very brief summary. I think all of us know what happened, but I think Gabe's going to kind of just give us a very brief overview.
Sure. So as we all know, a couple days ago in the city of Parkland, just an hour north of Miami, there was a school shooting in Stoneman Douglas High School. You used to go to that. You used to be in that area.
I lived a few miles from Stoneman Douglas. I went to Coral Springs High School, and so that was our rival school. And so I have been in that building for sporting events as a kid when we had our football teams and that kind of stuff. And I was in drama because I was a drama nerd in high school, and we had drama competitions at Douglas. So I have personal knowledge of the building. In the buildings, I've been on campus, but that was many years ago. But yeah, I do. And I grew up, a lot of my friends still live in that area. I have some friends who are teachers in that area, and no one who was at Douglas on Wednesday. But definitely it's a completely different tone. I've definitely had a lot of text messages and phone calls with some friends who are teachers, and it's changed the environment and how it's been a rough couple of days for everyone. I think it's been particularly a rough couple of days for educators. They've had to have some really hard conversations.
Of course. Hard conversations with not just their students, but even amongst themselves. Apparently the school had been trained for a scenario just like this not too long ago, and still as prepared as everybody felt they were, it was still obviously a tragedy that affected every single person there, and affects us here and throughout the nation.
And I think for us, we're in a unique club from a community perspective, in that we understand the hurt and the anguish that a community goes through when they have this kind of loss. And, you know, Pulse is in our backyard, and all of us had someone who we knew or knew someone who knew someone. And it's just, there's such a tiny degree of separation at this point in our country. I feel like so many of us can say that we know someone who was at an event or had a friend of someone who was at an event. It seems like it's just a couple of degrees of separation, and that's made it difficult for all of us, I think. And I think for those of us who are here in Orlando, or those in Las Vegas, or in any of the other areas across the country that have recently suffered this type of tragedy, it really is re-traumatizing for many. And so I encourage all of you that if you need to speak to someone, we put some phone numbers up on our page on Facebook the other day of some mental health services here in Orange County and throughout Central Florida, that if you need to speak to someone, if you feel like you're in a position where you need to just chat and just have someone lean on, just someone to lean on, I encourage you to use those services that are in place, and those phone numbers are on our Facebook page, and Katie can probably repost that image with the numbers. But really, that's our number one priority right now, is to make sure that everyone is in a good place. Right. It kind of leads us into this conversation of, should we be talking about this so close to the event?
I mean, the conversation's important, the conversation's hard, but it's a conversation that we need to be having. It's a conversation that affects all the communities across the nation, especially us here in Orange County. And I think nothing gets solved without the conversation.
Correct.
If people aren't talking about it, we're not getting any closer to a solution.
I agree. I mean, in my opinion, this conversation should have happened after Columbine. I mean, and that's a long time ago for many of us. But it's become too much of a norm. And this idea that we shouldn't talk about hard things is misleading. And I will say that anyone who tells you this isn't the time to have this conversation, this isn't a time to talk about solutions, is a person who knows they're on the wrong side of the argument. It's because that person knows that if they start defending why they believe what they believe, that they're going to look like a jerk, and that's being kind. I think that it's the time for thoughts and prayers is no longer good enough. This is a time for policy and change. This is a time that we need to activate ourselves as advocates, because our elected officials are not doing enough. And that means as parents and as citizens, we need to step up. This is not a time where we should just sit back and say that we need to just mourn right now. I will tell you that there are 17 families planning funerals. There are 2 funerals today. It is our obligation as people who are not currently planning funerals to fight for those who are. They are mourning, and it is our responsibility as other humans to step in and do what they can't, and that's to be their voice. And so we're going to talk about some things today that probably I'm going to get criticized for saying that I'm politicizing this or that I'm being opportunistic, and I'm going to tell you right now that I strongly disagree. This is the time for a conversation. This is a time for your leaders to step up and say we have hard things to solve and we need to do them. And I will tell you that we can do hard things. This is not going to be easy, and this isn't a one solution problem. This is a multifaceted problem, and so we're going to kind of go through step by step where we see some gaps and where we think could be filled in. What other states have done. Katie's going to drop in some resources. And from the average citizen's perspective, we're going to drop in some resources about really wonderful organizations that are doing the work that needs to be done, specifically Moms Demand Action. Katie's going to drop that link in there. Moms Demand Action is an organization that was founded after Sandy Hook, and they have been doing the hard work of changing gun laws in this country since that tragedy. And they are doing their best, but they need our help. They need more voices, and they need more people. And we need to be those people, and we need to get behind them. So Katie's going to drop their link in, and it's a nonpartisan organization. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on. We could all agree that we need to keep our children safe. And so I encourage you to go to their website. They have an amazing amount of resources. You can look at specifically what the gun laws are in your state, in your county, and you can see how you compare to other states. They have a very interesting tool there for state analysis. I encourage you to do that. There are other organizations that are doing just as good at work. But Moms Demand Action is one that I would highly recommend, and I'm part of that organization, and I suggest that everyone be part of that organization. So from our perspective, we look at this in my previous job, I was always invited in from a program evaluation perspective. Invited in, people would tell me how their program was laid out. This individual came into the system, they interacted with this individual, they did this thing, and then they moved on to this program, and this is how we graduated them out. And my job and my team's job was to always find the gaps and say, well, where could we have diverted this person this way? Or are we spending money in the way that we should be spending money? Is there too much in this program? Can it be shifted to that program? Or are these individuals in this particular step not as well trained as they should be? And so that skill set, we're going to try to apply that here. So we're going to think about this very broadly. And as I said before, I don't see this as a one solution problem. This is a problem that needs to be addressed all around, wraparound services, as we say in mental health. And it needs to be something that we don't just say, well, we're going to do this one thing and then that's good enough. At this point, nothing is good enough. It's just not. It's just, we haven't gotten there.
There's no real perfect solution, but then again, not having a solution at all is just as big of an issue. So.
Correct. And it's overwhelming.
It is. It is. It's an issue that has gaps at every level of government, beginning from the very top in the national level all the way down to even here our own local ordinances and the local rules. And it would take lots of work and lots of conversation, and it's good to start now and it's good to start here. So
one of the things that I've been hearing, and Katie, jump in if we have any comments or suggestions along the way, but one of the things that I've been hearing is that it seems to be polarized. Either people are saying this is a mental health issue or people are saying it's a gun control issue.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't feel like we have... it's one side or the other, and obviously that lines up with some different kinds of ideologies and political standings, but I feel that it's actually both, and it's a lot of other things that need to be added in there. So Absolutely. Let's talk about this from the mental health perspective.
Okay.
And from a mental health perspective, we always hear about the background checks, and what do we know about the gunman's purchase? From
what I've read was that it was he was able to purchase it on his own. I think he did pass the background check. Mm-hmm. He had passed the background check, but clearly the background check wasn't enough.
Correct. The individual in this scenario, the perpetrator, the killer in this scenario, he's confessed. I believe that he's given that statement in court already. He was institutionalized prior to this event. Yes. So there was a history of mental illness, and he yet was still able to get the weapon. And this is problematic because I know that from a legal perspective, the person who sold him the gun did everything that the law required them to do.
Right.
I put no fault on that business owner. They followed the law. I think then we have to say, well, then the law's flawed.
Yes.
Right.
And there are organizations actively trying to make it as easy as possible to get to get a hold of these guns and a hold of these types of weapons. And at the end of the day, it's not the business owner's fault. They are doing everything that they can to make sure that they're in compliance with what we as voters ask them to do. The issue is that we're not asking lawmakers to make the laws more difficult and safer for us.
Correct. And so I think there's a gap there. I don't think we're asking the right questions from a mental health perspective, because clearly the questions that this individual was asked did not reveal enough to throw up a red flag. And so the background checks that are in place are clearly not working.
Right.
So we need to revamp that. That's step one. I don't know if it's one. I don't think it's one in the sense that these things need to happen in that order, but it's from a lateral perspective, they need to be happening collectively.
Correct.
So we need to really rethink how the background check is done. And some of the legislation that's going through our state and our federal government right now is talking about that. There was a bill that that was supposed to go before our Florida Senate, not the federal Senate, but the one in the state, our Florida Senate. It was an agriculture bill. It was about seeds and plants and things that have to do with agriculture. And you can look this up on page 89 and 90 of that bill, and it was almost a 100-page bill, was a few line items about background checks. They had tried to throw this into another bill. This is what they call pork in a bill. And they had tried to throw this into a bill, and it was going to go before the House Senate, or before the Florida Senate, yesterday. And because of the incident that happened on Wednesday, it didn't, because we spoke up. But had it not, that piece of legislation, that line item in this bill, that would have not enhanced I don't want to mischaracterize it, but it definitely was not enhancing the background check. It wasn't making it harder for people.
What was going to happen? What were the line items? The
issues in there, from my understanding, and you all can read it, we'll see if we can get a copy of that posted up there. Katie's giving me the thumbs up that she's able to find it. The issue in there was that you have a background check, you file for the background check, there's a certain waiting period for that background check, and the idea was that if you didn't hear back within a certain period of time, that it was deemed that you were okay to buy the weapon. So it was like, if you go to a doctor and they're like, if we don't call you, it's good news. You know what I mean? Like, they do blood work and they're like, no news is good news. That was kind of the idea, was that if we didn't hear back from you, then yes, you were free to buy the weapon. I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, and I think inherently that's an issue.
Correct, because it doesn't take into consideration if there's a backlog.
Right.
It doesn't take into consideration that what if certain scenarios, like, the agencies that are doing the background checks, things happen. Things get lost. There's human error. There's ways what if it was at the time of the hurricanes? And what if what if things were backed up? What if it's an issue like, when the government was going to shut down, when federal government was going to shut down, people said, well, you better hurry up and get your passport paperwork in, because if the government shuts down, then that's going to shut down that agency, right? What if it's something like that? What if there's things beyond our control that slow down the process, and now we've said, hey, within 90 days or whatever the benchmark was, within a certain number of days, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That's how people fall through the cracks. And I know I've heard a lot of people say that this individual fell through the cracks. He did not fall through the cracks. He fell through a crater. There were so many red flags here. This is not falling through the cracks. There were too many red flags. This should not. And in many other scenarios, we hear this often, where people say, oh, yes, you talk to the neighbors, and the neighbors suddenly say, oh, yeah, that guy was not right. But you need to say something. Right. See something, say something. I think we need to get back to that mentality.
Yeah, you're right. And I think a lot of people did try to say something. I think there was conversation.
Yes, and that's why he fell through. That's what so many red flags.
That's what makes it a crater rather than a crack, that there were people that were talking about it. There was even a tip to the FBI where they were trying to figure out if it was him, but they couldn't really figure it out.
Because of a spelling, something about the name, the way his name was spelled as well. Right. That there was some discrepancy.
That it could have been somebody else, but they couldn't really narrow it to the perpetrator himself. But there were red flags that were up, and there was, conversation about it. However, there's ways to get around it, and I think that's where us as community advocates and community organizers need to pressure our lawmakers and demand more from our elected officials and those running for office to find those loopholes, find those cracks, and seal them up, close them up, and make sure that something like this is more preventable than it was.
Correct. And I will say that this piece of pork that was in that agriculture bill didn't go forward because people like us and people like you and other activists and other individuals in the community got wind of it and said, no, this is not okay. And so I want to really put a strong emphasis on how strong your voice is and how important it is that you contact your legislator, and speak to them and tell them your opinion. And Katie is going to put in all the phone numbers of our state legislators. We'll do that for the federal level as well. Everyone obviously in Florida has the same two senators, so Bill Nelson and Marco Rubio. And your House member is going to vary based on where you live. Mine is Darren Soto. I'm in House Seat 50. Most of District 4, if you live in District 4 for Orange County, most of District 4 is House Seat 50, but there's some on either side. Some of you have Val Demings and some of you have Stephanie Murphy. Sure. So that's going to vary a little bit. If you're in other parts of the state, we could Katie can put in a link to the U.S. House of Representatives, and you could put in your zip code, and then you could find out who they are. But Katie's going to pop in those numbers. And I also want to encourage you to not limit yourself to federal government. This individual bill that we were talking about with the agriculture, that's a state bill. So that's your state senator. For those of you who live in Lake Nona, Avalon Park, Hunters Creek, Meadow Woods, that's Senator Victor Torres, who has been a strong champion for us. So encourage him to continue fighting that fight. But Linda Stewart is also a state senator for this area, and there's several other state senators, obviously enough to cover the state. So it depends on where you live. I was in DC earlier this week and advocating for children's health. And one of the things that we often do when we go up there to speak to people on the Hill for the advocacy day is the legislators who have done good work for us, who continue to do good work, is we thank them. So I know that we know who the individuals are who are supporting the cause, who are fighting the good fight. Don't forget to call them and thank them. Right. So yes, call the ones who we know are not doing right, and make sure they hear your voice. But it's also important for the individuals who are elected officials to hear that you like what they're doing. Because if they start to hear from the other side, then they're not going to know your voice is out there. So it is important. So I know that our current state senator here in our district is a great champion for us, but it's important for Senator Torres to hear from us and thank him for his good work. And the same for the other elected officials throughout the community. And if you know someone is doing something good, it's always nice to get a little email or a phone call from you. And as far from an advocacy perspective and calling up, I want to say I've been advocating for children's health for the last 5 years, and many people ask me like, oh, so you just go in and have an appointment? And I said, yeah, we make an appointment. These are our employees. As an American citizen, we have elected these individuals to do a job for us. And if you're not happy, you should let your employee know that you're not happy with their work. It's our responsibility to do that. And as your elected official, as your potential elected official for Orange County, I view all of you as my employee and as my employer. And if you don't like the job that I'm doing, I hope I hear from you. I also hope to hear from you if you like what I'm doing. I want to hear thank yous too. But I encourage you to do that. We talked about mental health issues, and that is just a small aspect of it. And I also want to say this, that I've worked with many mental health professionals. My area of expertise from the criminal justice side is mental health and substance abuse. So I've been in mental health court numerous times, observing court and observing programs and done the analysis to look at the effectiveness of mental health court. And I will tell you that these individuals who are in the courtroom who have mental illness, that many of them, I'm going to get you the exact stats and we'll have Katie pop it up. But from my recollection, I'm going to say that it's close to over 90% of these people are not violent. And I want to say that because there are so many people who suffer from mental illness and who feel ostracized. And I want people to know that it's okay to step forward and ask for help. What we're looking to, from a gun perspective, what we need to do is identify that remaining 10%. And we need to make sure that those remaining people do not get weapons. And that means we need to tighten our background checks. That means we need to tighten the way that we're looking at how people are purchasing weapons. And that's going to lead me to the next thing is let's talk about the gun laws here in the state of Florida.
Sure, yeah.
So we have, if you want to talk about that, and then I'll kind of pop in.
Sure, yeah. Currently, the way that the legislation is written is that in order to purchase a handgun, so something personal, something like that, you'd have to be 21 years old and of course pass the required background checks. But then to purchase a semi-automatic weapon,
which is the weapon that was used
correct,
on Wednesday.
The specific weapon that was used was
it was also the weapon that was used in Sandy Hook and in Pulse.
It was all of them.
And in Las Vegas and in churches and in movie theaters. It is the weapon of choice for these individuals.
Because it's those kinds of weapons that are easily accessible and do the most damage possible. There are other accessories, like in Vegas, they had the bump stock that made it far more deadly
Correct.
than it needed to be. So that's another part of the gun control conversation that we need to be having, that our legislators need to be having in regards to approaching to a solution. But at least here in the state of Florida, in order to purchase that kind of weapon, you need to be 18 years old, as in I can purchase a lotto ticket, not a can of beer, but I can get an AR-15. And I think personally, the way that the laws are written in Florida is just it's an issue.
It's a big problem.
It's a big problem.
So we normally go to 12:30, and we have a few minutes left. We're going to go a little long, if that's okay with everyone. So we're going to go a little bit long.
That's okay.
So we're going to continue to chat. So let's talk about this law. So in the state of Florida, as you said, you can buy a handgun at 21, but that's a restriction. But you can get this AR-15, which is the weapon of choice for these very disturbed individuals, is their weapon of choice for these incidents is the AR-15. You can get that at 18 years old.
Right.
Now, there are 18-year-olds who are still in high school. That's a pretty average age. That's most seniors are 18. Sometimes you, depending on when your birthday falls, you might even be a 19-year-old senior. Right. So we're saying that we think it's okay as a society for 18-year-olds
to have the ability to purchase these weapons.
Correct.
Just as easy as a 21-year-old, as anybody really.
Correct. Now, my children are only 5 and 8 right now. But I've been around 18-year-olds, and they don't always make the best judgment calls.
No.
And so I feel that that's part of the reason that we have alcohol laws.
Yes.
It's part of the reason that we don't allow children, and I'm going to call them children because 18 is kind of a borderline there, right?
That's
fine. We don't allow minors to have alcohol. Mm-hmm. And when people have this argument and they say, oh, well, it's about this thing or that thing, and if we just fixed this one part, I'm going to say no, that's not accurate. We need to fix all the parts. And the example that I'm going to give you is drinking and driving. And, 30 years ago, drinking and driving was an epidemic. And a bunch of moms got together and formed MAD, Moms Against Drunk Driving. Mm-hmm. And we have since reduced the number of drinking and driving incidents. It's gone down dramatically because they approached this from a multifaceted perspective. They didn't ban alcohol. That's not what they did. No. We can solve this problem of gun violence without banning guns. We did it for alcohol without banning alcohol, and we can do it without banning guns.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that the moms who championed drinking and driving legislation is that they looked at it at all levels. They looked at it at the county level, how can we change ordinances? They looked at it at the city level and other municipalities. They looked at it at the state, and they looked at it at federal. And quite honestly, a lot of it had to do with money. It had to do with who was supporting what cause, and we're going to talk about that in a second. We're going to talk about the NRA money in a minute. Let's get to that. But it also came down to many of our states, I believe it's all of our states except for Louisiana currently, has a drinking age of 21. There may be one other state, but I'm pretty sure Louisiana is still 18.
Yeah.
And the way that the federal government encouraged states to change their law is because they said, if you don't change your law, we're not going to give you money for infrastructure and roads. And the state said, oh, well, we need your money for infrastructure and roads, so we're going to change the law to 21. There are ways for our government to encourage states to do the right thing. There are ways for citizens to encourage our states and our federal government to do the right thing.
Right.
And we need to do this at a level that makes sense for each individual state and county. So there may not be one specific law that we can blanket across the country. It may be piecemeal, but we will slowly get to that. And I think that we need to continue to have this conversation. And I know that there are going to be some people who are going to avoid this conversation because it's going to be hard and because they don't want to be criticized for their opinion on something. And I'm going to ask you to think about your elected officials who are not having this conversation today. Think about your candidates who are not having this conversation today. I personally feel that that's a reflection of their character. You can all draw your conclusions. But anybody who tells you that they have the best interests of your community in mind and doesn't want to talk about the fact that we have 17 dead people, we have 15 dead students, we have 14 dead students and 3 dead teachers, and that we can add that to the carnage that has been going on. This is the 17th school shooting. 18th school shooting this year. This year, 2018, it's 6 weeks of the year, and we are at school shooting number 18. Yep. Any of the elected officials or candidates who tell you that this is not a time for a conversation, you really need to question whether or not that person has your best interest in mind. this is the time that we need to have the conversation, because this is the time where people will actually do things. It cannot wait any longer. We waited after they gunned down kindergartners and first graders. We waited after they did this at a movie theater, in a nightclub, and at a concert, an outdoor concert, and it's not time to wait anymore. Now's the time to act. So I encourage you to call the legislature, to call the numbers that Katie's posting, to get involved with Mom's Demand. And let's talk about the NRA money.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of special interest, and money, according to the Supreme Court, is a voice, and yeah.
So there's money in politics, and in order to run a campaign, you need money because you need to reach voters. I will say this as a candidate, I am raising money. I have to raise money. It's part of running a campaign. I have to pay individuals. I have to pay for outreach. I have to pay to get media markets in different areas to reach my voters. It's a requirement of this job. It's not a requirement to take money from special interests. You can raise money without doing it. And we have the money that's being paid out to elected officials and to candidates that are coming from organizations like the NRA. And I don't want to paint the NRA as being the only problem.
Sure.
There are probably lots of other, I don't want to use them as the only example, but there's probably lots of other organizations that are pushing for legislation that isn't in our best interest.
Right.
But it's the one we know the most. So that's why I'm using that as an example. But there's probably plenty of others. That information is open. Katie's going to post a link. It's called Open Secrets. It's a nonpartisan organization. You can search up your legislator. You can see all the donations they've received. You can look it up by who received money from different organizations. So you can type in NRA. You could type in any of the other organizations that are out there, and you can see who's giving money to what candidate. That's important. And I'm not trying to politicize this, but the idea, it's our politicians who are causing the problem at this level. And
it's our politicians' refusal to do anything about it.
Correct.
That's causing it.
Yes.
That's making it a problem.
Correct. And so you have to ask yourself, if you're getting millions of dollars from an organization that wants to limit background checks, that wants to encourage silencers and things that would make it easier for someone to have a mass shooting, that would make it harder for law enforcement to do their job, how are their best interests in mind if they're taking money from an organization that are pushing for those pieces of legislation? So inform yourself. And this is going to require some work. It's not going to be easy. This is not going to be an easy task.
It's a little bit of typing.
This is going to require some work to be an informed person and to change the way we do things. I would also encourage you to look at the efforts of our current law enforcement. I have 100% faith in our law enforcement that they go out every day to do their job the best they can and to protect us. We have to give them the tools to be effective. And if they are fighting against individuals with weapons that are stronger than theirs, and if they're saying, and the police chief or the sheriff down in Broward County made a public statement at the vigil yesterday saying that this is not acceptable and that he wants to see legislation changed, and that any public official, and I'm summarizing, but we could find the video and post that along, but he said any public official who doesn't agree with him and who doesn't change the laws will no longer be elected in Broward County. We all need to take the stance of that law enforcement officer. This is an expert in the field, and it's time that we get behind the experts who know what they're doing and we give them the support that they need. And they're telling us that this is no longer effective and that they can't do their jobs effectively because of the legislation and the political bills that are coming through Congress and through state government, that it's making harder for them to do their jobs. This is already an incredibly dangerous job. These are individuals who are putting their lives on the line for us every single day, and we owe it to them to make sure that we're giving them the tools and not working against them. We need to make sure that that's happening.
I agree.
So go and look at Open Secrets. The other issue that I think people talk about too when they say, you know, this is a mental health issue or this is a gun control issue, and then I've heard a lot of people, I was listening to NPR this morning, and a lot of people were saying, like, we need to make our schools safer. And I would agree, we do need to make our schools safer, but that isn't the only solution. And then what about our movie theaters? And what about our churches? And what about open theaters where we have concerts and nightclubs and all these other places? Are we just going to live in a place that has a security level of an airport all the time? Like, that doesn't seem, it's not feasible, first of all.
No,
and it doesn't
it doesn't solve the issue. It just prevents us from having, it's not even preventative. It just keeps us from having the conversation.
It's reactive instead of proactive.
Right, that's the best way to say it. It's us reacting to an issue instead of sitting down and being proactive and solving the issue.
Correct. And I think from having been on Douglas's campus, it's different than most buildings, and I know that the way that Florida school buildings are is you usually see a lot of duplicates. So like sometimes you'll go into one school and you're like, oh, this is kind of like my school. It had a lot of entrances. It has a lot of buildings. I don't know how you lock that down in a way that wouldn't really feel like a prison. And is that how we want to send our kids to school every day? I think that when we're talking about it from an elementary school perspective, it's maybe more feasible because there tends to be less entrances and exits. But when you're talking about campuses that house thousands of students, like a high school and sometimes a middle school, these are sprawling campuses with a lot of entrances and exits because at that point in your educational career as a student, we give you a little bit more freedom. We let you walk around and have electives and, have lunch outside. You're not restricted to the lunchroom. And that's the environment we want our children to grow in. And so this idea that we need to now lock them down with barbed wire and armed fences seems...
For the sake of safety.
For the sake of safety, when I'm not suggesting we don't need to increase safety. We increase safety at the schools, but I also don't think that's the only solution. I mean, it just can't be one or the other. Right.
It's a multifaceted issue that needs multifaceted solutions. And increasing security at schools is a wonderful idea if our law enforcement has those kinds of resources, but it does require a little bit more thinking outside of the box. It can't be... If the solution were this simple, where we just needed more police officers on campus, I think we would have already solved it, and this tragedy would have been prevented.
Correct. And I would also say that from a law enforcement perspective, they have two very challenging... this is challenging all around. But there's two very challenging aspects here, because if you're talking about something like Sandy Hook, where it's an elementary school, at my child's elementary school, you do have to be buzzed in and out. So I feel like that's pretty standard at most elementary schools. Maybe not. But you're talking about keeping bad guys out. Because from an elementary school perspective, it's usually an intruder. And so they have these intruder drills at the elementary school level. At the high school level, we're talking about the bad guy's already in there. And so if we're in a lockdown situation, you've now locked yourself in with the bad guy. So think about that from a law enforcement perspective. Like, this is every possible worst nightmare from a law enforcement perspective of how do you keep people safe when the bad guy's already in there. So it's not in some scenarios, it is about keeping people out. But in other scenarios, it's what do we do when the person's already in there?
Right.
And I know some people have said metal detectors. And I know there are some high schools who do have metal detectors. I don't know if the elementary schools, I haven't heard of any elementary schools having that. But I know that there are some high schools that do have that already. I guess that's something we need to explore. I think we need to see, is that going to help us make sure that we don't have that? I mean, we can go down to this. When I was at the Women's March in D.C., they sent out this protocol of what to bring and what not to bring. And they asked us all to carry clear bags. And so then do we all switch? Because they want to see what's in your bag. Now, it wasn't enforced very well because it was such a big crowd. But is that what we switched to like kids having clear bags? So you could see everything in their backpack? I don't know, where do we draw the line and say we're being proactive or we're being reactive, and all of these things need to play together. And I guess this is a conversation for a variety of people, but it seems to me that we can do a lot of things to keep our kids safe. There's a lot of options, a lot of discussions that need to be happen at the school board level, at the county level. And at the end of the day, a lot of this comes down to an education piece from a variety of sources. And one of the things that I really like about Moms Demand is that they have some education pieces on their website. And some of the things that they talk about is gun safety in your home. They have a whole session on there. I don't want to mischaracterize what the name of it is, but they have a name for their program. It's an education piece where they talk about talking to your children about what if they enter a home that has a weapon. or having a conversation with other parents. If your kids are going on a play date, you should ask the parents who you're leaving your kid with, do you have a weapon in the house? Is it locked up? Are there's a responsible gun ownership perspective to their campaign, which I think is great. They also have a program, I believe, where they go into the schools and talk to the kids about different things. I think that all of these parts matter and they all need to happen. I think the disturbing part for me is that, I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and this is not conversations I want to have with them. It's hard. And, my kids have had I believe they call them intruder drills. They may be called active shooter drills. I'm not sure what they characterize them as for the kids. But my kids have had those drills. I think most, at this point, sadly, all elementary schools and high schools and middle schools have had those drills. I didn't have those as a kid. I didn't have any drills because, we don't have even tornadoes here. So it's not like we would even have a tornado drill.
We had those drills.
You had tornado drills?
We had tornado drills. We had our fire drills, of course.
Fire, yes, of course.
And even when I was in high school, we did have our code reds, and that was something that they had announced. They announced it as a code red, and they knew what they were talking about. But as prepared as everybody else was, we still had, casualties.
Well, and I will say that the administration that spoke to the news from Douglas yesterday and on Wednesday, many of the teachers said that they had, and the students as well, had said that they just recently had drills. They had a fire drill that morning, but they had also had other types of preparation, and that they had changed their protocol, that their new assistant principal had put in some new protocols in place, and that they all had this new protocol that they were following, and they felt very prepared. And so from their perspective, they said they were as prepared as they possibly could be. So I think that that then begs the question of if this was an example of a school that was as prepared as it could be, then we now need to look outside for where did the problem occur? Solutions beyond securing our schools, because if this school was the top of the line, yes, we prepared as well as we could prepare, then why did it happen? Right. So I think that's where you start to go back to the mental health issue and the gun restriction issue and the gun limitations and the different types of how much ammo can you buy and all those other kinds of things. And before we get away from the school subject, I do want to say that this year or this week in Orange County, and I don't know if it was a statewide initiative, but this week in Orange County was supposed to be a week for our teachers to fight for increase in a variety of support systems that they need, that they were going to be protesting downtown at OCPS, at Orange County Public Schools. The tone of that has now had to change for them. We cannot expect our teachers, these are college-educated men and women who have dedicated their lives to educating our children. We cannot also expect them to be armed. We can't expect them to put their lives on the line. And that's exactly what's happening. 3 teachers put their lives on the line on Wednesday. Multiple teachers put their lives on the line at Sandy Hook. That is not an obligation I want to ask my daughter's teacher. And we as a society and as a state need to make sure that we're not only protecting our children, but we're giving the teachers the resources and the ability to not have to do that. And we already have a teacher shortage. And for us to then make this a job that is life-threatening, we are at such a disadvantage. We're putting our community at a disadvantage because these are hardworking teachers who have dedicated their life to educating our children. And I guarantee you there's some teachers questioning whether or not they want to go back to school, or there may be some...
Whether or not they feel like they can.
And I guarantee you there's some young student right now at UCF who wants to be a teacher and is proud and happy to get into the classroom and is maybe questioning it. Or maybe her parents or his parents are even saying, like, are you sure? I mean, do we now have the same hesitation, as proud as a parent would be to have a law enforcement officer or a fireman? We know that every day they walk into the line and that we know that their life is at risk. Are we now going to add teachers to that same group? That as a parent, we have to worry for... I know that the emphasis is on the children who died that day, but those teachers are somebody's children. And so... is that where we are in society? It's sad from a variety of levels. I mean, it becomes more and more disappointing as we go through it.
Yeah, as you dissect.
You dissect it.
It does become more and more apparent that there are faults and that there are shortcomings at every single level, at every single angle to a very complex issue that doesn't have a simple solution.
Yeah, so we're going to be closing this out soon, but I want to end this in two ways. So the first thing that I want to say is that we can do hard things. We can change this. We need to start having conversations like what Gabe and I are having, and we need to have conversations like this with people who disagree with us. Mm-hmm. This was somewhat of an easy conversation because Gabe and I agree.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
We're on the same page. We need to go across the aisle. We need to go across the street to our neighbor who maybe disagrees with us. Right. In your own family, you may have disagreements. There is a way for us to preserve people's rights and still be a protected society and still be able to feel safe sending our children to school.
Absolutely.
And so we need to keep this conversation going amongst your family members, amongst your neighbors, and then you need to join together and you need to start calling your legislator. You need to make sure that your voices are heard by your elected official, and that starts at the county level, that starts at the state, goes to the state and to the federal level. So yes, call Washington, D.C. and the numbers Katie has posted up there. But please be sure to call the legislators in Tallahassee. And all of your legislators, whether they're in Tallahassee or in Washington, D.C., they all have district offices. They all have offices wherever it is that you live. They all have offices here in Orlando if you're an Orlando resident. All of our elected officials have offices here. You can call up and make an appointment. You can show up and you can tell them what you're feeling. You can call them, you can email them. They need to hear from us. They need to have you show up at the door. And they need, quite honestly, they need to hear from us regularly. This can't be a one-time call today. Mm-hmm. We need to keep calling and keep emailing until things have changed. So I'm hoping that by March, we could have a lighter conversation.
I'm sure we will.
I'm sure we will. This isn't going to be a simple solution, and it's not going to be it's not going to be something that's going to happen quickly. It's going to require us to continue to have the conversation and to fight this good fight for a long time. I'd like to end on two happy notes.
Okay.
So I want to say happy birthday to my friend Adam Woodhall. I hope you're watching, Adam. So Adam is a wonderful supporter and friend, and I wanted to say thank you to him and happy birthday. And my friend Jessica is having a baby by Monday because the doctor has said giving eviction notice on Monday. The baby's got to vacate. So I am incredibly happy for Jessica, and I wish her all well on Monday and a speedy labor. And I cannot wait to cuddle baby Carter. And I leave you with that we have a whole new generation of people coming into this world, and we need to do our best to give them the best world we can. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you'll join us every third Friday, and I hope you like the Facebook page. Our website is nicolettespringer.com. Thank you guys. Have a good day.